So there's been a lot of talk recently, the last couple of weeks, with China basically trying to unseat the United States as the world reserve currency. And they're actually making some progress in doing that. Russia, Iran, India, a bunch of different other countries, that whole BRICS union thing, trying to formulate a plan to unseat the United States. And in this video, I want to go through what that would mean for us here in the United States. How would our lives change? What other situations might arise from that one situation? And granted, it is a tough situation to talk about because you don't know how extreme it's going to be, how quick it's going to be, a lot of different variables that go into this. But I did find this article from Survival Sullivan. I read this the other day and I wanted to go through it, which talks about when the dollar collapses and some of the worst places to be if that were to happen. And as I go through this article, this is the 9 worst places to be. But think about this in terms of it's not just going to be 9 places that are going to be going through these struggles. These are examples, and the examples that they give in this article could apply to your situation as well. So think about that as I'm going through these. What type of situation are you in? How close to the situation, say in Los Angeles or New York or any of these other ones? How close does that kind of mirror your situation, and what sort of things can you expect? So first off, in this article, he talks about just how life has been so good here in the United States for so long. And it says here, while we think we have it tough, we actually have it pretty good. Store shelves are mostly full. Emergency services come when you call. The government is around and keep things all generally in line. Even those in the direst of straits rarely miss a meal. In fact, the amount of government assistance is astronomical. Next, consider the amount of international aid the U.S. makes available. And you have a significant portion of the world that is dependent on the United States. In short, if the dollar collapses, many places in the world will be dangerous at best and apocalyptic at worst. Now, before we get into the rest of this, I want to talk about how the United States, we have become this society because of what he just talked about there. Life has been so good here. Everything is, everything we want, everything we need. It's all usually, right there. And a lot of people in this country have become spoiled brats. A lot of people in this country feel entitled to their opinion or everything that they have, their current daily life, the way they do things. You hear stories all the time about all the things that people get riled up about. And these people wouldn't have one clue how to handle something if a situation like this arose. And it sure seems like the pieces are getting put in place for something like this to happen. How does that unfold and what does it look like? We just don't know. And that's why we prepare. So I think it's interesting. And I think it's one of those things that it should be on this list when we're talking about a financial collapse or some sort of financial crisis, is the people. Because people these days, life has been so good. There's never been any issues. People these days feel like they're entitled to, the world should run according to the way that they think and feel. And it's not going to happen. Pretty soon, if something like this does happen, and I feel like it's something that's inevitable, how it all plays out, I don't know. But people are going to have a rude awakening. And I think we need to prepare for that as this sort of thing unfolds, because those people are going to be the ones causing a whole lot of problems. So in this article, before I get through this list of the 9 places, he talks about the world reserve currency a little bit, and I wanted to go over that. On a global stage, the U.S. dollar is a huge deal, from being the world reserve currency to being the main means for purchasing oil. The dollar is a significant part of the world economy. As a result, countries around the world and their central banks have a constant need for the U.S. dollar. Just as you keep stocks and bonds, world banks invest in U.S. currency. If your retirement account crashes, you need to work past 65. If the dollar crashes, the world banks have little recourse except to fail and take their countries with them. Except for the United States right now feels like that it can just print money on demand and do whatever they want. In 1974, Richard Nixon secured an agreement with Saudi Arabia and other members of OPEC where the common currency for oil was the U.S. dollar. A lot of things happened back in the early 70s, right? We completely went off the gold standard. The Federal Reserve basically went into overdrive and put us in the situation we are now. But in short, this is why how everything got set up, basically. Here it says, with the economic collapse, if the dollar collapses, it will take out local economies as the purchase and sale of goods will stop or severely slow down. Like I said, we don't know how this all pans out. The result will be a panic run on banks and stores until a secondary currency, barter, precious metals, etc., can be established. A digital currency, I think that's something that's very real, a possibility that is definitely on the table, that they let this happen so they can bring in the digital currency. At any rate, second, the U.S. government will fail to meet its responsibilities to the individual states in the form of aid, causing further issues as the states will fail to meet their obligations. Finally, the U.S. won't fail to maintain its support of other nations. The U.S. spends billions of dollars on supporting and influencing these other nations. Now, what I think is interesting about this is he lists us first here in the United States and then other nations as well. I'm not so sure that's how it goes. I think you see the way things are going right now with the United States, our government basically looking outside of our borders and helping them first before they look inside, unless you live in California, that is. But so I don't know that it's going to be hey, we've got to help our people so we can't support you. It's going to be, hey, you're going to have to tighten your belt because we still have obligations to meet outside of the country. So it's just going to be interesting as far as all of that, how it unfolds and what our government deems a priority at that point when all of this stuff comes down. So at any rate, what I want to do is talk about some of these that they have on this list, these different places. And the first one is a shocker here, right? California. Los Angeles, those big cities in California. It says here, California as a whole has nurtured its dependent society. As the most populated state in the Union, it contains the second largest city, Los Angeles, and the fourth most dense city, dense as in populated, not dense as in stupid, although both may apply, San Francisco. The result is that the state is the fourth in total welfare spending. California also has a gang problem with an estimated 450 gangs in Los Angeles alone. On a good day, the ability of the local, county, and state police to keep the gangs in check is stretched to its limits. Finally, California has an active border which has led to millions of undocumented residents, on purpose, I believe. In all of its generosity, California has taken on the burden of providing its undocumented population with the free health care, government services, and education. All this adds up to a significant portion of the state's aid spending. So with California, they may be the shining example, right? The sort of the canary in the coal mine that we should all watch if things start to go downhill, like I think they will. They will be the ones affected the most. States like that will be the ones affected the most. He talks about New York in here too, although for a couple of different reasons. But, basically welfare states or states that spend all this money to make things better for people. And, the equality thing that we hear all the time these days, because we don't have any other problems to worry about, so we worry about those problems. And California basically put that in hyperdrive, and they are going to be, at least the big cities anyway, are going to be the ones severely affected. And you will see throughout this list, there are, there's a recurring theme here as far as big cities and all of that. Now, the second one here is Chicago, which is pretty interesting because they just got rid of Lori Lightfoot and put in somebody it seems like is even worse than her as far as crime and all of that goes. So we'll see how that unfolds with Chicago over the coming months. But here it says with Chicago, Chicago recently beat out Los Angeles for the largest number of gangs within its city limits. At over 8 violent crimes per 1,000 population, 2 murders a day in 2020, Chicago is violent during the best of times. When the federal dollar dries up, Not only will assistance end for the average citizen, but the federal aid will also affect the support systems such as police, fire, and EMTs. When 911 no longer answers the call and the police no longer respond, the criminal element won't take long to notice and take action. An already violent city will turn apocalyptic as those with power will seize what they need from those without the means of defense or the ability to escape. And this is one of those things. Yes, Chicago is sort of the shining example right now, but this happens all over the place. And if it were, it doesn't take much to overwhelm, say, EMTs, the fire department, the police department, the hospitals and all that. Right now, we're sort of, everything maintains a nice steady flow. But if things were to get bad and those services were to sort of fall apart, where does that lead everything? So it is something, I think, when he's talking about 9/11 not responding, it would take something pretty large scale for that to happen. But there are different degrees of that we could see, depending on where you live, what state you live in, what town you live in, how close to an urban area you are, all of those different things. So those are important to keep in mind as this stuff devolves, how close are you to situations like that maybe popping up. The next one they've got here is New York, which is another one that's not a big surprise, right? But it is for a couple different reasons than California. The Big Apple will have big problems if the dollar collapses, not the least of which is its geographic location and orientation. The greater New York area consists of Long Island, Staten Island, Manhattan, also an island formed by the Harlem River. New York City is essentially cut off by geography. The result is approximately 18 million people will be cut off from their source of food, water, and medical supplies. They say that we're 9 missed meals away from anarchy. If this proves true in New York City, then the priority will be to escape the island to safer ground. And this is where the problems come in. Everything is connected by bridges, and everybody is sort of separated in New York. So if some sort of disaster were to happen, that becomes a major issue, the congestion and all of those things. Right here it says the bridges connecting New York City with the rest of New York and New Jersey have a limited capacity. And as we saw in 9/11, they can quickly become unusable to vehicle traffic, and the masses will have to walk to escape the chaos that soon envelops the city. So in a situation like that, where you sort of are cut off, let's say you do get out, what are you going to do at that point? Yet a lot of people don't have the option probably to just leave. So what are they going to do? And what sort of crime is going to, come up in that type of city environment where there's only a couple of bridges leading out? What sort of, situation makes happens in an area like that? Pretty tough to, it's going to be pretty tough to handle something like that. So you'd almost have to leave. If you live in one of those areas, I think it's, a bug out plan is absolutely one of your most important goals, because you will need to leave that area. And if not, it's going to be, like the old movie with Kurt Russell, right? Escape from LA, going to be something like that. So at any rate, the next one here on this list is Washington, D.C. And the seat of democracy in the United States is not immune to the ills of society. Washington, D.C. has double the violent crime rate and double the poverty rate of the national average. That's insane to me. It is almost 20 times the crime per square mile versus the national average, and 16% of the population is below the poverty line. Washington, D.C., I know that there are the super well off, and then the not so super well off are the super poor. So there's not that, there's not much of that middle ground like there are in some other states. Over 7 million people live in the nation's capital. A large number live only temporarily in D.C. as their representatives and support staff for all other places in the U.S., including military or supporting contractors. A sudden collapse will cause all the normal chaos experienced by other densely populated areas. The primary difference is that DC, there will be an urgency to leave and go home because everybody is sort of transitory there. So sort of the same thing as New York. And you probably see something like this in California as well. All the big cities across the country, people trying to leave and get out of there. Couple this with the observable exodus and overt protection of the privileged classes. Our politicians, no kidding. The social divide will become untenable and the chaos will be inescapable. That is a very good point right there, I think, because it is going to be just like that, where if you have the means, if you are deemed quote unquote important, you're going to get a little bit more special treatment. And I guarantee you, we've seen it time and time again when it comes to Washington, that there are some very important people that matter a whole lot more than the rest of us. And those people are going to be getting the special treatment. And I'll tell you what, in a situation like this, there are going to be a lot of people that are not going to have it. So, and again, that is one of those things. We're talking about an economic collapse or, some sort of crisis. That is just one part of the whole big puzzle. You look at all of these other things that could go on around you, and I think those are the things that are important to look at as well. All right, the next one we've got here is Louisiana. And Louisiana, we all know anyways, is got a pretty large crime problem to begin with. And a situation like that could just exacerbate everything. The fine line between survival and disorder is that we meet basic needs. More and more members of society depend on government assistance. Be it for food, shelter, medical care, a segment of society requires assistance to meet these requirements for a comfortable life. Or as comfortable as possible anyway. Louisiana receives more federal assistance per capita than any other state in the union. Almost 20% of its population lives below the poverty line. In America, it is possible for the poor to find a meal relatively easy, be it government food stamps or charitable giving, sometimes called soup kitchens. A meal is usually a short walk or a few miles away. And this is very true in a lot of the big cities. You can, the homeless population, food is not one of their major issues, right? There are other things that they're concerned about because there is food everywhere. There's churches. There are, that's why they congregate towards those highly populated area, because the churches and the foundations and all the things that basically put on daily lunches, and they know exactly where to go to get food. And then you've got the begging and all that. But when the coffers dry up, like they're talking about in this, and the ability for these people to do those types of things starts to run dry, and they're not able to do that, what types of situations do those bring? And with this, I'm not just talking about homeless people. I'm talking about people that are barely paying rent, people that are trying to put food on the table for the kids. All of these people that sort of depend on those for their daily lives. What happens when that stops? And what sort of situations arise from that? And, looking at just this article right here and thinking about these scenarios seems pretty bleak. But that's the concern I have with the willy-nilly spending and the irresponsibility of our government, is because it's not just a monetary thing. There are a whole bunch of things that could a whole bunch of cracks in the pavement, and everything could start falling apart. All right, so the next one I've got here, West Virginia, which I really hadn't thought about until I read this, but West Virginia has a host of issues that will be impacted by the collapse of the dollar. West Virginia is just behind Louisiana, ranked number 2 in the number of citizens per capita that receive federal assistance. Complicating this issue is West Virginia's drug problem. West Virginia is number 1 in drug overdoses and deaths per capita in the country. Didn't know that. The dependence on drugs will only accelerate the downfall of the state. When the dollar collapses, addicts will have to search out other means to pay for their next fix. Unfortunately, they will spread and affect both rural and urban areas, compounding the other issues already discussed with other cities and states. So this one is an interesting one to me, because we talk about all the time as preppers about, will they come out to the rural areas? Will they leave the cities? Some of these cities, like in the East, Kentucky, West Virginia, all those states, Tennessee, even here in Colorado a little bit, you do have those city centers, but they're not that far away from the rural areas. So you could see a lot of that. The people see that everything is depleted in the inner cities, or they're not getting what they need, and then a few start going out, and then a few more start going out. So it would spread. Now, granted, that would take some time, and that would have to be, a lot of people are going to be looking to the government for assistance, and just thinking, okay, when are they going to finally get this stuff together? Once they realize that there's no getting that stuff together, that's when I think you see sort of that exodus from the inner cities and sort of moving out to, I guess, greener pastures for them anyway. It would be greener pastures for them. So, and that's what we need to think about as preppers. If we do live in those suburban areas, what sort of time frame are we looking at? And we don't really know, but we can make as best of an educated guess as we can. So this next one here, they sort of get into the global type situation, and London, I think London, Israel, a lot of different countries across the planet really do depend on us, and this is sort of how we could see that global type situation unfolding. The United States won't be alone in its negative effects of the dollar collapse. It has been said many times before, when the U.S. gets a cold, the world gets the flu. London will not escape the effects of the downfall of the dollar. London is home to over 9 million people. As one of the most visited cities in the world, it is home to an incredible mix of Londoners and foreigners alike. Many are refugees or have come to live and work in London. When times get tough, London will most likely fracture into many, many factions enforced by cultural differences. The next one, and I'll go through both of these at the same time, the Middle East and Israel. One of the few democracies in the Middle East, Israel, is threatened by its neighbors on a good daily basis. Oftentimes, the United States urges Israel to keep a steady hand when international affairs heat up and kinetic action seems to be on the horizon. Likewise, the Pledge of Assistance keeps otherwise hostile neighbors at bay. If the U.S. dollar fails, then much of its aid to both Israel and its neighbors will fade. As a result, the U.S.'s ability to influence the regions into peace will disappear. It won't take long for the feudal nature of most countries in the region to reassert itself, causing international chaos as well as outward acts of aggression. Now, in this article, he talks about London and Africa, Ethiopia, the Middle East, all of these countries. But I think when you look at a global type situation, you are going to see, London, Europe as one whole thing, not just London, but Europe sort of, because it is a really big mix, and there are a lot of refugees and a lot of people from different countries, and the different countries are only a few miles apart. So it is, that part of the world is really congested, and it could see a whole lot of problems. When you talk about the Middle East, people over there just love to fight regardless. So without outside, if all the countries had to sort of just worry about themselves, there would be nothing to stop all these countries out there from just blowing each other up. And does that mean nukes start flying? There could be a whole bunch of different, a lot of different situations that unfold from this. So I think it's the geopolitical aspect of the United States falling apart. It's not just us here in the United States. It could have catastrophic consequences across the globe. One more I'm going to read on here is, one more that they have on here is Africa, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Sudan. Many African countries rely on the United States, their allies, and associated non-governmental agencies, GNOs, for critical levels of aid. Of these, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Sudan received a total of $3.7 billion from U.S. aid from various programs. The crisis in these nations range from food insecurities to political and social upheaval. The U.S. brings much-needed food assistance, humanitarian assistance, and consultation services on everything from faith-based services to small business operations. Now, it's not just the United States that does this as well. This is a global thing. But what happens when all of that is not able to, isn't able to happen? Now, also with Africa, which, this is sort of like how the United States bribes people into partnering with them. You've also got China down there in Africa trying to wield their weight. And if they are successful at, taking over the world reserve currency, what does that mean for down there? Because people in Africa, a lot of them already hate us anyway, but they tolerate us because of aid and because of other things like that. So what happens if that all goes away? There is, and they're not a whole lot different than the Middle East as far as warring with each other. They're a little bit better, I suppose, from what I know. But there is going to be a lot of that upheaval. And when people can't get fed, when these resources aren't available down there, people in general start to freak out about all of this stuff. So with this, I want to read the very last part here about escaping, what we can do about it as preppers. And here it says, there are very few activities in our daily lives that aren't impacted by the strength of the US dollar, a lot more than most people even know. The bounty of stores, the stability of our infrastructure, and the safety and security provided by our police, fire, and emergency services. The crumbling of our financial foundations will cause instability at all levels of life. Stores will be empty, 911 will stop answering, and the police and firemen will stay home to protect their own families. Here it says, all is not lost. There will be a few ways to preserve your wealth and your life. First, as the sign of collapse becomes obvious, start moving your soon-to-be worthless cash into tangibles. Anything that you can barter with becomes value as others failed to stock up. Food, water filters, hygiene items, the medicines, all top the list. Next, move your cash into precious metals. Gold and silver have held value since biblical times. While they may not be immediately tradable and valuable, history proves that in the long run, precious metals have always been valued. Finally, be prepared to move. The right rural area may be isolated from the worst of the damages, and a self-sufficient homestead or bug-out location can be a refuge from the trials and tribulations of more populated areas. If in doubt, leave the U.S. There are many locations around the world that have modest amounts of wealth and can provide a subsistence level of living for a long time. So it's easier said than done when it comes to websites and preppers giving you advice on all of these different things. Move, get yourself a bug out location, start investing in gold and silver, do this, do that. It's different for all of us. Some people have the means to do that, and some people will be less affected because of that if the dollar were to not be the world currency anymore, or if the dollar were to collapse, or inflation went up to 100%. So there are some people that are just more ready to handle a situation like that. And then there are some people that just are, there is no means to get a bug out location. There is no means to move out of the city. There's no money in the bank to take out of the bank and invest in precious metals. So it really is just a tough situation. But it is one of those things, as preppers, we need to do everything that we possibly can in the event that something like this does happen. And this isn't a guaranteed event either. So it sure does seem like that the cards are stacking up, or everything's stacking up to, really point in that direction more than I've ever seen in my life. But that doesn't mean that they don't pull some sort of rabbit out of their hat with the digital currency or this. I mean, they've pulled a bunch of rabbits out of their hat over the years, and it seems to just keep this freight train moving closer and closer to the cliff. Eventually, that's not going to work anymore, and they're going to have to do something. But we just don't know that it's a given at this point. But the best we can do is prepare for these different things the best we can. And that means the food, the water, the important things. We may not be able to move out of the urban area, the suburban area that we're in. So how do we make that situation the best that we possibly can at this time? So, it was just an interesting article, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit because it is something that, there are you always see these articles, the worst places to be. You don't want to be here. You don't want to be there. It's going to happen all over the place. These are just good examples of what could happen in the area you are in. Just maybe not on the scale that it does in these other places. And maybe it is. I mean, you just never know. All of this stuff, all of this civil unrest and all these different things could be sporadic. So you just don't know if a fire is going to light in your neighborhood or around your neighborhood to kick something big off. We just don't know. At any rate, I am done here today. If you guys have any comments on this, if you've got any news recent news about the world trade, the world currency, and the BRICS things going on, and China basically trying to take the United States seat at the table, trying to make their money the petrodollar, all of those different things. If you have any comments or suggestions or questions or anything like that, make sure and leave them in the comments below. If you did like this video, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification button, and I do videos just about every day here. So make sure and watch out for those. But at any rate, take care and prepare, everyone. We will talk to y'all later.